Hello and welcome back to linuxjabba.com, where we prepare you for Linux jobs. My own name is Sean Joseph and my email is showpopulas@gmail.com. If you have any questions, please send them over to me and I'll be sure to help you out. Today we will continue with our explanation of LDAP. We have done two videos previously. If you go to our website here at linuxjabba.com, let me move it to the center stage so you can see it. If you go to our website here at linuxjabba.com and you go to tutorials and you go to proficiency lecture, inside the proficiency lecture you will go down to lab 107. If you go to lab 107 and you will click on, so this is the 107, and we click on the 2 on the lecture notes, and you will see that there are two videos here, right? This video explains what is LDAP, and the second video explains the installation of LDAP. This is a step-by-step configuration of the installation of LDAP and preparing it for use. So this will be a third video that we're about to make today, and it just explains the security of LDAP. So when we did this previous video, we did not talk about we did not explain security. All we did was install LDAP and configured it for use on port 386, meaning that there is no on port 389, I'm sorry to say. This means that there is no security on it. It is just plain transfer between clients and the LDAP server. But in today's video, we will be looking at setting up security so that information between the LDAP server and the LDAP clients will be encrypted. So now, first of all, I will draw up an LDAP server over here, right? So now, in the previous video, if you have not watched that previous video, it will do you a lot of good to go back and watch that video, because otherwise this one will not make as much sense. You have to watch those two videos to understand what we have done so far, because this LDAP entries here was described before. Now this is the LDAP server that I'm just drawing right now, and these entries are inside the LDAP server. Now, I'm just drawing an LDAP server to continue with the previous video. And inside this LDAP server, there is that port 386 that we have been using. So let's just say, for instance, for argument's sake, that port 386 is right here. So let's just say it's right here. But we don't want to use port 386. Why? Because it is not secured. You know what? Let me move it down here just so it's close to the LDAP entries. So communication between a client. So let me put a client down here. What happens is that communication between a client means your machine at home that you're using for LDAP connection. So this is your pretty much your laptop, and you're trying to query the LDAP server saying, give me the phone number to Mr. Jane or Mrs. Kim, and that LDAP server is going to respond to your machine. That communication between your client, between this client's machine and the LDAP server is what we're trying to encrypt. So originally, now let me write this here so that you can see who our client is. So this is client, LDAP client. So we can say this is Joe PC, right? So let's say this machine is Joe PC. So this is a machine. So now this machine wants to query this LDAP server for Jane. If it does so on port 386, let me write port 386 here so you can see that also. If it does what it wants to do on port I keep saying 386, I meant 389. If it does it on port 389, there's a problem. It will be communicated plain text, meaning that if somebody was listening to the communication, they will also see that information. We don't want that. So what do? We create port 686. So now this port 686, this one is encrypted, and that's what we're about to do now. So this video is explaining LDAP encryption, right? So how does this happen? What is really happening? That's what we have to explain in this video. So to cross out, so let's cross out this port 389. So to cross out port 389 and start using port 386, one thing has to happen. And start using port 386, one thing has to happen. We have to configure LDAP to use port 686. We have to configure LDAP to stop using port 389 and start using port 386, port 686. Now, for this to happen, we have to configure it. We have to make it happen. So the first thing we would need to do is that to make this communication between Joe PC and LDAP server, to make them encrypted, how does Joe PC know that the LDAP server is actually the authentic LDAP server? How does it know that it is not dealing with some what they call man in between, what they call so how does it know that it's not another machine in here that's pretending to be this LDAP server? So somebody could have easily just put a machine here, and that machine will respond to Joe PC and say, don't worry, I'm the LDAP server. How does the Joe PC that's somewhere on the internet, how does it know that it's actually dealing with LDAP server? So I'm going to draw internet here, right? So this is the internet. Let me write it there so that you can see it, right? Internet. So now, anybody could have been in between Joe PC and LDAP server. So the way this problem was solved is that we go to Planet Moon. We create something called Planet Moon, right? And in your LDAP world, this will be your certificate authority, right? So now this is called certificate authority in LDAP world. Let's just call it Moon for here, and I'm going to label it CA for certificate authority, right? CA for certificate authority. So now what happens is that first, whoever is configuring this setup is going to go to the Moon here, which is certificate authority, and say, hey, look, I need to do an encryption, and everybody has connection to, we all have connection to the Moon because the Moon is available for everybody. So please help me certify this LDAP server so that communication between anybody and this LDAP server can be secured. And this CA, this Moon, is now going to say, okay, I know what to do and I know how to make sure that your LDAP server is authentic, how to tell everyone that it is authentic. So how does it do it? The way it does is that it gives us an agent. It's got plenty of agents, right? So it's got plenty of agents. So it gives us an agent from Planet Moon, and that agent, I'm going to give it a moon head so you can see it, right? And that agent, let's first of all put that agent here, just so that, so let's say this is the agent. It's got a moon head, right? And let me give it a moon hand and a leg so you can see it, right? So it's got a hand and two legs, right? So now this is an agent of Planet Moon. this planet's moon gives us this agent. It says take this agent and put it on this machine. Whenever someone comes to this machine, like Joe PC, whenever they come to this machine to talk to this machine, the first thing they will have to do is they will have to ask me, are you sure this is the LDAP server? And I can tell them, go to my agent here. If my agent, if you check the ID of my agent and the identification is correct, then that's the right server. If not, then it is the wrong server. So even if there was a man in here in between, right? So let's say there's another machine in here that pretends to be LDAP server. That machine will not have this agent. And if they put a fake agent there, then the CA will tell us that, look, it's a fake agent. It's not the real agent because the ID will not be correct. So now, CA gives us this agent. What do we do with this agent? We don't just throw it in the slash temp or slash home. We have to put it in a specific place. And that specific place, we have to tell the LDAP server, meaning the configuration of LDAP server, where that specific place is. So where are we going to put it? I'll show you where I am going to put it, right? You can put it anywhere on this machine. You just have to tell your configuration file where that agent is. So I am going to open up /etc. That's a little too thick. So let me make this small such that it's readable and it's not too big. So I'm going to go to /etc/open LDAP and then go to /search. Now, you don't have to put it in here, but by convention, it is good to put it in there just so that whenever next you go there, whenever next you come to this machine, you know it's in here and you don't have to remember it. If you put it in some custom location, something that nobody knows and nobody remembers it is there, the only problem is that the next time you come around, you will not remember that it is there. So in real world, we call this the certificate files, right? Those agents, we call them certificate files. But for now, for the sake of our explanation, I will keep calling it agent. But just know that they are certificate files, and I'll show you the certificate files in a little bit. So now, let's put the agent inside here, right? So I draw the head of the agent. I give the agent a body and I give it a hand. So I'm just putting the agent inside this location here, right? And once I put the agent inside this location, I then have to go and tell the configuration file that the agent, the CA agent, the moon agent is inside this place. So I have to tell the configuration file. So what happens in this case, as you can see, if all of this makes sense to you, is that the next time that Joe client wants to communicate with the LDAP server, the first thing it does is that it goes here to the internet. You know what? Let me use something else so you can see it. So Joe client goes first to the internet, right? So when Joe client goes to the internet, what happens is that it says, okay, I want to communicate on port 686. I want to communicate with this machine on port 686. But what happens is that it's not sure now that it's actually dealing with the right machine. So what happens is that since it is not sure it's dealing with the right machine, it's going to first of all go to the CA authority and say, that's the certificate authority, the moon, and say, okay, this I want to communicate with this LDAP server. Who is your agent that you asked, right, to stay at that machine? And the certificate authority is going to give Joe PC the ID of the agent. So then Joe PC is going to go back to the machine and say, let me look at this file here. let me look at this file here, right? And see if this agent has the right ID. But and this will work. In reality, what happens is that when you configure Joe PC, you tell Joe PC where this agent is. So when you configure Joe PC, and I'll show you the configuration in a different configuration file when I do this. So when I make it, I mean in a different configuration video. So you will tell Joe PC that on the server, on the LDAP server, right? On the LDAP server, the agent is in Open LDAP sets. This is where you will find the agent. You will tell Joe PC that you will tell all clients that that's what happens in reality, so that the next time they go, they just automatically go to, anytime they want to talk to the LDAP server, they automatically go to that location and pull the agent's ID from there and make sure it is the correct ID at all times. And that's how they prevent another machine from getting in the middle here and saying, hey, look, I am the LDAP server. Because they will go, if another machine tries to do that, they'll go to the Etsy Open LDAP search and they will not find the correct agent. Even if there's an agent here, the ID will not be the same as that of this agent here. And that's how you use the right port 686 to encrypt information. And what happens is that that is just to understand, to speak with the right machine. Two things are happening when you're doing that. So the first thing that happens is that, let me write it down here so you can see it. So the first thing that happens is that when you're doing security is that use the authentication, meaning that first of all, make sure you are talking to the right person, right server or correct server. That's the first thing you have to ensure. And the next thing is that you want to encrypt information. So I have explained how they make sure that they're talking to the right server. Then the next thing that happens is that the server and the client are now going to be passing information that's in this LDAP entry back and forth between themselves. So once Joe PC has been able to determine that the LDAP server is the authentic LDAP server, it will now begin communication. And once it begins communication, what happens is that it will now start sending Jane's entry or Kim's entries or whoever's entries they are asking. The LDAP server will now start sending it to the client. The client will make the request first and the LDAP server will respond. Now, the second thing that happens in this setup is that this communication will then be encrypted. In layman's term, we will say they're using Moon language. Remember we call this Moon? Remember that we call it Planet Moon? And this agent is from Planet Moon. So the language that port 686 on the LDAP server and this client will speak will now be the Moon language, and nobody in the middle can understand that particular language because each agent speaks a different language. Each Moon agent speaks a different language. So because of its ID, it will speak a language that only this client will understand. If there's another client connected to this machine, connected to this network, they will not be able to understand that language. And that's how they take care of encryption. So two things are happening. You make sure that you're talking to the right server, which is authentication. It's not authentication, but just make sure that you're speaking with the correct server, the appropriate server. And then the next thing is make sure that you are encrypting the information that you're sending. That's the setup we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and make the next video that will do the configuration. But first, I wanted to make sure that you do understand what is happening. If you don't understand LDAP security, it will be difficult to understand the configuration, and that's why people think LDAP is complicated, because they don't understand what is really happening. So now that we understand how the authentication works, LDAP secure. Now that we understand how LDAP security works, we will go ahead and do the LDAP configuration of the. We'll do the configuration of LDAP security, meaning that we'll go to the command line and start working on it. This video is just the explanation of how it works. Well, I hope you understand it. If you don't understand something, send me an email and I will be sure to answer your question. This is my email right here, showpopulous@gmail.com, so you can send me the email and I'll be sure to respond to you. Thank you very much for watching this video. You have a nice day.